Welcome to Life After Philosophy, where I interview former students about philosophy's effect on their lives. I'm Christopher Anadale. Welcome to Life After Philosophy. My guest today is someone whose work I've been a fan of for years, science fiction novelist Rob Kroese. Rob is a 1992 graduate of Calvin College, where he majored in philosophy. He is the author of over 34 novels, most of them self-published, including The Big Sleep, a dystopian Blade Runner-esque mystery featuring philosopher detective Erasmus Kane, and many series of books, including The Cross-Time Crusade, the Mammon series, The Counterfeit Sorcerer, and one of my family's favorites, the fast-paced and very funny Rex Nihilo series. He is perhaps most widely known as the man who successfully crowdfunded a series of novels about Vikings building a spaceship using 11th century technology in Dream of the Iron Dragon and its sequels. He is the organizer of BasedCon, an annual science fiction and fantasy convention held in Michigan the past 3 Septembers. His newest Rex Nihilo books, A Scammer Darkly, A Grift Too Far, and High Plains Grifter, are available on Amazon now. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I have to also I have to make one small correction. You said The Big Sleep, which is the book I wrote is The Big Sheep.
It's The Big Sheep.
Yeah,
I actually wrote The Big...
referring to The Big Sleep, so it's understandable.
Of course, it's a typo on my part. I'm sorry.
No worries.
The Big Sheep, which always struck me as I don't know whether you think of it as a Blade Runner-esque sort of noir mystery, but I've thought of it as being like that, but with a kind of a sickening twist. Not to give anything away, but
sickening twist.
It was really, really kind of stomach churning for me reading it the first time years back.
Yeah, it's a little odd. It's sort of a mix between. It's sort of like I've been watching the BBC Sherlock show, so it's kind of like that sort of dynamic between the characters, but set in sort of a Blade Runner-esque world, and then with a nod to The Big Sleep, Chandler book, of course, and with some standard Kroese weirdness, as you mentioned, that people will find out about.
Was that one of your last non-self-published books?
I think it was, well, that one and the sequel to it, The Last Iota. They're those two books. I had a contract with Macmillan Imprint, and it's self-publishing at this point it's just easier, and it's faster. I have more control. It's easier. There's not really a big advantage at this point. I did it honestly at the time for mostly because they were going to give me an advance and I needed the money. So I did. That's why I took that contract. But now with like my Kickstarters, do really well. And so I raised as much money as, or about with the Kickstarter as I would, getting an advance from a publisher, and advances are getting less and less common and smaller, and so kind of self-publishing is getting more and more reputable, and it's kind of now they're two traditional publishing and self-publishing. There's not really any big difference between them anymore as far as quality. It's just more people involved, and it takes longer, and you have less control with a traditional publisher. So.
Yeah, it feels like maybe the culture is taking time to catch up in terms of prestige and people's expectations. But when I think about self-published authors, I think you and a number of other people are doing really well at it. Yeah,
and the thing is nobody really looks at that or cares anymore. Because it's like nobody buys. I mean, it's kind of sad in a way, but most people don't buy books in bookstores anymore. They buy them online. Amazon is the biggest retailer, and mostly people buy ebooks or audiobooks these days. So 10 15 years ago or more, it was kind of a big concern, like, how do I get my physical books into a bookstore? And now it's like I don't even bother with that anymore, because it's not worth the trouble. I mean, sometimes my books do end up in bookstores, like the Big Sheep ones that I did with the traditional publisher. Sometimes they will be stocked at bookstores, but it's not worth the. I would much rather spend my time figuring out how to sell books on Amazon because that's a better use of my time. So it's a much bigger market.
Do you find that you have to be sort of constantly on the hype circuit to promote your work in that case?
Yeah, not so much hyping as just kind of being aware of the market and what Amazon is doing and what other people are doing around Amazon and to some extent other ebook markets. It's just yeah, I mean, I spend probably as much of my time on just kind of marketing as I do on writing. Like every time in between my books, I'll spend a few weeks like catching up on stuff. And there's all kinds of like I took all this recently. My one of my projects that I was doing is taking all my sales data and kind of correlating it with all the different sorts of promotions that I've done, basically to see what works and what doesn't, what's the ROI and things. So stuff like that is actually it's kind of fun to do. It's a lot of work, but it's like, you know, I like to know, I like to get into the numbers, get into the data and see what's going on. And this is stuff that if I were only wanted to write, and I said, I don't want to mess with any of that. I don't want to dirty my hands with the marketing part of it. That would be a good reason to go to a traditional publisher because they would handle all that stuff and they would say, well, don't write this kind of books don't sell, and or you know, you should change it to this, or we should release this book at this time, or you know, this date, or you know, whatever, and promote it in this way. Not that they necessarily know either, because most publishers are failing. I kind of like it, so I get, you know, my hands dirty and all that stuff, and yeah, so it's a constant. I mean, it's part of the job because I'm a publisher as much as I am a writer. So
Yeah, you're kind of a one man shop. I've
yep.
talked to a friend of mine who's a farmer who said that, you know, to be a farmer you have to also be a businessman. And he says I'm very good at the farming side. The business side I still have to learn about. There's all sorts of government relations and regulations and
Mhm.
you know, paperwork and political log rolling that goes into the sort of just the business side of anything that's highly regulated. But authorship maybe not so much.
No, there's not. It's kind of a more of a Wild West kind of environment, which is kind of nice because there isn't so much of that, especially with ebooks and audiobooks. It's kind of just whatever, you know, however the market evolves on its own, which is kind of fun and exciting, but you know, also a little exhausting because it's always changing. So
Earlier, I brought up Erasmus Kane, one of your characters, though from a series of books some time ago, who is a sort of explicit, you know, philosopher type character. He's eccentric. I recollect I read the book, you know, some years ago, The Big Sheep.
Big Sheep,
It
yes.
was it also Schrodinger's Gat? Was that another one featuring the same character?
Not the same characters, but that was another kind, yeah, very philosophy heavy uh, book. That was my quantum physics noir thriller, is what I call it. So,
I've got to get to that one then. But I was thinking, I haven't brought up philosophy so much yet, but you're a fellow who graduated with a philosophy BA around the same time that I did. You followed very different paths in life, but there's plenty of people out there who will suggest or even sort of push very hard the line that, you know, study of philosophy is at best a kind of wasted opportunity and does look, you know, overwhelmingly like a path either into poverty or if you're especially unfortunate in just being into becoming a kind of insufferable prick. And
yeah,
you're neither, I don't think. Do you think that you just got lucky, or
I
is there
think
something? Yeah, what do you
I
think?
thought that was law school that you're describing, where although that's not so much the ticket into poverty, but that it's like the it's like a career path into like how to be more of an asshole than you like you're already at this level, but we want to get you to like a 9 or a 10 on the
Yeah.
scale. Um, yeah, I think I I guess my suggestion if you were going to go into philosophy is do it if you really love philosophy. Um, and I will have to tell you as a kind of a caveat here, I was a terrible student I got mostly, well, B's and C's, dropped a few classes and took me an extra semester to graduate and stuff, just because I was so dead set on not doing anything anybody told me to do, which was my own kind of psychological issues, and it makes it difficult to get through an academic program when you're like, screw you, you can't make me do this, because you kind of have to do what they're telling you to do.
It's called libertarian personality disorder, perhaps.
Yes, yeah, kind of autistic and oppositional, defiant, and extremely analytical at the same time. So I did enjoy philosophy, and the thing was that I realized, like, shortly after graduating, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I have a philosophy degree. I don't know what I'm going to do now, which is a thing that you should really think about before you graduate. But I just thought, well, I'll get a degree or whatever, and then I'll get some kind of job. Actually, I actually had thought about, I was thinking about going to law school, and then like I was at the process of, I took the LSAT and did well on that. And I thought, well, even though my grades aren't great, I could probably get into a decent law school. And then I had an application to one of these schools, and it said, basically the question was on there, there's an essay question. Why do you want to become a lawyer? And then I just looked at this page and I was like, I don't. I was like, wait a minute, I don't know how to answer that question. I can't, I don't want to do this. It sounds terrible. Like I said, it's like just a way of kind of like amping you up on the asshole scale from like a 7 or 8 to a 9 or a 10, because you just become, like, nitpicking about every little thing, and that's what being a lawyer is. And I thought, maybe I have enough of that in my personality as it is. So I thought I'll go to grad school in philosophy, which is not a terrible idea. But for someone like me, but I actually went back to Calvin and took a semester of graduate level classes, because they have kind of, they're not now they're a university. They call themselves a university, but they don't offer like a graduate program in philosophy. I don't think they do now, and they certainly didn't back then. But they did have some graduate level classes, and I thought, well, if I'm going to try to get into a philosophy grad school program, they're extremely competitive. Like, it's like the most competitive thing on earth, basically, because there's so little demand, and so that so many people who want to do it. Unbelievably, it's like just about impossible to get into or at least to get some kind of whatever you call it, financial benefit for doing it.
Right.
So you don't have to pay to go to grad school. So I thought, well, I should go back to school and actually apply myself. And so I went back to Calvin for a semester and took 4 graduate level philosophy classes, and got straight A's in all of them because I was actually putting effort into it. And then I got done with that, and I was like, I still don't really feel like I want to do this. I was like, I just don't want to be poor for the rest of my life. So I took a detour into software development. I was like, I need to do something with computers, because this was like early, 92, 93. And I was like, I need to do something technical, because like, the internet, computers, all this stuff is going to be like, the big thing. So I, bought a computer, taught myself a little bit, and I ended up moving out to California and starting at a technical support job. And long story short, I was doing technical support for a couple of years, and then that kind of morphed into doing like I was maintaining the company intranet and stuff for and that eventually gradually moved into sort of a software development role. And then I got really into more into the software side of things, and I was writing software for 10, 12 years or so in Silicon Valley. And other than like the political stuff, again, where I didn't like people telling me what to do, and I don't like complying with arbitrary rules and stuff. Other than that, it's kind of a lot of fun. And philosophy, building software can be fun. And there's a lot of parallels actually between writing software and doing philosophy, because you're doing, basically what you're doing is you're poring over code or arguments and trying to find the mistake.
Yeah.
And that's what you spend a lot. It's like, why isn't this working? Why can't I get this thing to output this text in the right format? Or why can't I prove that God exists or whatever? What's the problem here? So you go through and you go, oh, here's the line. This is where I'm making an assumption that is not, borne out, where I'm actually, I thought this was an integer, but it's something else and whatever. And it's a very similar process. So if you like philosophy, you don't necessarily need to go into a job doing philosophy. You could get a philosophy degree like I did, and I think it's probably a lot more fun than doing like a computer science degree or something, where you're going to learn more of the technical end, and you're going to have to learn the technical stuff too. But it's good kind of a mental exercise, because then you end up, once you end up kind of learning the specifics of the milieu of software development, then you're just kind of doing philosophy sort of the same. Yeah, so there's a lot of similarities between software development and doing philosophy. It's more or less the same sort of thinking process, where you're poring over either code or arguments, and you're trying to find the error, trying to find the mistake. So if you do enjoy philosophy, and you can pick up the technical stuff on your own, it's not a bad career path to go from philosophy and then go, into something like software development.
I remember a friend of mine who left grad school in philosophy to go into computers. This was during the tech bubble of the late 90s. Trying to entice me to go with him, had told me something I remember to this day, that computer programming is basically Boolean logic plus syntax. You just read a whole lot of books about the syntax of the particular system that you're learning with. And I'm sure it's more complex than that. It probably was even back in the 90s. But it does seem that if you can think clearly and logically, which is a skill you can get from philosophy and from other disciplines besides, then that's just what you're doing. Like you say, it's applied problem solving within the context of whatever code system you're working with, right?
Right. It's very similar. And I mean, and the thing is that if you're the kind of person who can write software really well, you could probably do philosophy and vice versa. So but either one, you're going to need, some training in practice. And so you're working that same part of your brain. So like, to me, I kind of jokingly tell people like that, it was a waste of time to taking philosophy, but it is a worthwhile thing to read all these arguments and try to figure out where the mistake is, or if there is one, because again, yeah, it's very much a similar thing. The only thing, in fact, one thing that I will say is that I was actually too abstract in my thinking, because like you were saying, that it's basically Boolean logic and syntax, but there's another aspect to software development, which is hardware, and it's easy to forget about that as a very abstract kind of thinker who is dealing with, you're used to like dealing in philosophy, where it doesn't really connect. It's all very abstract. It doesn't connect to anything concrete. The people are not going to die if you get the trolley program, a problem wrong or whatever, because it's all theoretical, hypothetical. But with software, you're writing code that is like, you're instructing one computer here to talk to one, maybe that's on the other side of the world, and you don't know. You're thinking abstractly. You're just thinking of how logically these things interact with each other, but you're not thinking, oh, this thing is 6,000 miles away from the other thing, because it's a totally different. So you have to learn. The one caution that I would tell people is, make sure you don't have to be a hardware expert, but keep in mind that you're dealing with actual physical things that have to interrelate, because the most elegant way to write a piece of code that looks absolutely beautiful to you, because it's so simplistic and so concise, is not necessarily the best way to do it, because hardware is hardware.
I seem to recall learning a while back that Reuters and some of the other companies we think of as international wire services now, I think got their start transmitting financial data because in the economy since the 90s, certainly getting data across the Atlantic, let's say a couple of seconds faster, could make a tremendous amount of difference in terms
Yeah,
of the kinds of trades you can do, the kinds of positions you can take, and that it's only upon that kind of infrastructure, both sort of software and hardware, that eventually was found to be, oh, we can also send breaking news along the same wires. It's just information, a different type of information, but the real motivation was to find a way to combine, kind of software and hardware program to get get data quickly for, I
yeah.
think, first for in the finance system.
And so now we're on kind of the far end of all those efforts to make things as quick and seamless as possible. And so we often forget that we're actually dealing with physical hardware that has, things that overheat, things that have latency, things that have all kinds of other problems. A cable gets cut in the ocean, and suddenly your program doesn't work quite the way it did before. And it might still work because we've got all this redundancy built into it, but you might suddenly have a delay that wasn't there before. And if you're not aware of that, if you're thinking constantly abstractly, it gets it can be you can get yourself into trouble by doing that. So
Yeah, thinking a lot about education, as I do, and I think a lot of people do, or sort of about generational changes that are happening now. There's a lot of things that, I guess, sort of upcoming cranky old men like you and me would say
mhm.
about kids these days. But thinking now about education, I wonder if the big division we're looking at is not so much, philosophy, humanities versus science and STEM, or abstract disciplines, sort of thought and book disciplines versus things with a practical application. But it's more about, how do I put this? The competent versus the not, and the whole goal of education is to become a competent person who can think well, who can have a big picture view of things, and can think about the hardware and its limitations as it affects the project, rather than being too narrowly focused. And it seems maybe for some people, philosophy is the way of achieving that kind of general competence in one's life. There probably are some other paths besides, so there certainly are. Um, does any of that sort of resonate with your thoughts about, I might say, kids these days?
Yeah, I think that I don't know about philosophy being the thing that necessarily will help them, but I think there's definitely something there that you put your finger on where at some point we've lost connection with the idea that people need to have sort of a realistic, sort of holistic connection with their own environment, their reality. I don't know if that sentence made any sense.
No, it makes great sense to me.
Yeah, so it's we raise people with sort of a fragmented view of reality, where it's like you're peering at reality through Twitter or Tumblr or YouTube, um, and a bunch of other things, and it's none of it really. It's sort of a fake reality. It doesn't really tie into anything real, and you may have some people may have some skills in different areas, but they're not necessarily connected to each other, and they don't maybe a lot about whatever insects, but it never occurs to you to apply the things that you know about insects to, say, like the way the people act or whatever. And it's like there
Yeah.
are parallels from one field to another. It's like, oh well, this is like this is like this, and they all kind of connect together, and that gives you sort of a holistic. And obviously, you're not going to understand everything, and very few of us are going to even reach the sort of Heinleinian ideal of I don't know the quote, but you probably know what I'm talking about, where you should be able to sail a ship, and God, can you remember, build a house, and all the other things that you should be able to do.
Right. That sounds like a Lazarus Long quote.
Right. It's like there's a list of these things. Like I say, specialization is for insects, and people should be able to do all these things, and I can do. He lists like 15 things, and I can do maybe two and a half of them. But I think we've lost the idea of like even the idea of like, yes, this would be a great thing if somebody could interact with their environment in this way. It's like we all just kind of wandering around half in the dark, not really understanding what world we're even in. It's a weird kind of creepy sort of world to be in, to have people wandering around like that.
It's strange to watch, and it's a topic of a lot of conversation, I'm sure, all over the place. I'm actually looking off here to the side. I've got open in one of my tabs a one of your BasedCon t-shirts, which has a Philip K. Dick quote on it,
Right.
which I hadn't heard before. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away.
Right.
Great. It's a great shirt. I've got to get one.
It's yeah, and I think somebody pointed out that he was probably talking about drugs because it's Philip Dick and he did a lot of drugs. But it applies to reality in general, which is that, yeah, it's like you can have all these kind of crazy ideas about reality, but it's only this stuff, and there's certain aspects of reality that are going to eventually reassert themselves. And yeah, I guess the idea is we've kind of gotten away from the possibility of, I guess one way of putting it is that we have a lot of luxury beliefs, things that we believe we can believe because it doesn't hurt us to believe it, and they may not necessarily be true, but there's no feedback mechanism. We can believe in that socialism is great and that it works. We can believe that there is no God. We can believe all these things, and it's like, I don't know, it seems to work okay, and nothing. But eventually, reality reasserts itself.
Right. Not immediately fatal beliefs. Yeah.
Right, not immediately fatal, and they're luxury beliefs in the sense that there's no pain, there's no feedback mechanism to tell us that they're wrong, but they're also luxury beliefs in the sense that they're trendy and popular and they make us look good. It's like, oh, I can believe this cool thing that because like social, I know people who are socialists basically because that's what the smart people believe now, and it's like, well, why not? There's no pain involved in it, at least for them. They're not going to a concentration camp. They're not being executed by Pol Pot or Stalin or whoever. So it's like, yeah, that's a cool, fun little 21st century belief that I can have until reality reasserts itself, as it always has in every socialist country ever. But people just ignore that and just like, oh, la 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 la, socialism is fine. So I have some definite definite political beliefs that you probably know about. So
No, absolutely. No, not a problem at all. I brought up BasedCon just a moment ago, and it had me thinking about something that I've done a little bit of thinking about myself some years back about the difference between what we might call, parallel institutions. There's one strategy there,
mm-hmm.
or institution capture, trying to, get a share of and use effectively the power in the institutions that are there. And of course, everybody who's not sort of currently invested in or feels like they have a share in or could easily have a share in the current powers that be, um, might adopt either of these two strategies, right? Take it over or make it redundant by building something just as
Right.
good or better. And BasedCon looks like in the sort of sci-fi writers community, it is definitely one of these sort of rising parallel institutions, and I think it's going into its fourth year now.
Yep.
What what's your sort of feeling about that, both as a writer dealing with other writers, and as somebody looking forward to the future of publishing and of sort of sci-fi fantasy authors and readers as a community?
Wow. Okay, so that's a big question. The So the impetus behind BasedCon is that 10, 15 years ago, I used to really enjoy going to when I was a budding sci-fi author. I used to go to these sci-fi cons all over the place, all over the U.S. And they're fun places to go and meet authors and sometimes like actors and people from Battlestar Galactica or whatever. And it was fun. And you go and you talk to these people and you go to panels and hang out at the bar and you get drunk and just whatever. It was great. It was a good time. And you hopefully sell a few books if you're an author like me. and write it off in your taxes. So it was it was good all around. And then, 7 or 8 years ago, when the whole kind of woke social justice thing started happening, they all these cons got taken over by this sort of extreme leftist social justice progressive element, and they became very unwelcoming to anybody who is even like slightly right of center, or even that, maybe not even that far right, or libertarian. And it happened very quickly, and it's almost total. There's almost no sci-fi cons like this that are like the way they used to be anymore. And to me, it was just, I was like, I want to get together with like other sci-fi authors and just hang out like we used to. And so I was like, what if I put together a thing myself? Let's see if anybody shows up. And other people were like, yeah, that sounds good. And then, other authors. And originally it was just going to be like, I'm going to have a get together with a bunch of authors. And we'll just talk about publishing and sci-fi and whatever, and we'll drink and write it off on our taxes. So that was the first idea. And so I was talking about this on Twitter, and I'm going to keep calling it Twitter forever because I think X is a terrible name. So I'm always going to refer to it as Twitter until I die. And people were like, well, what about non-authors? What if we other people wanted to come too and just come to hang out and talk or whatever? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So I put this thing together. I basically rented a big house on an Airbnb. And I had no idea if anybody was going to even show up or if I was going to be able to cover the cost of this thing. I was like, I need to have 30 people show up to cover the cost of the renting this place. And there was so much interest that even though this was kind of done sort of at the last minute, I had no idea what I was doing. Just threw it together, didn't really publicize it, only on Twitter. We ended up with 70 people there.
Wow.
That's 70 people. And then the next year, so that was the first year. The next year we ended up with about 90 or 95. And then I think the last year was around 110, 120. And we're going to have that's probably around 100, 110 people again this year. So we're growing, and there's a lot of interest in it. And I wasn't consciously. It's definitely an example of a parallel institution because the main cons are just so far gone but it wasn't really my intention. I just wanted to hang out with people and have fun and maybe brainstorm about how we could, market our books better, help each other out with writing and publishing stuff. And so I ended up creating this sort of parallel institution kind of by accident. But I think the left is very good at this sort of infiltration kind of thing, and the right is not. And I think that it would be nice if we could take over institutions the way they do, but I don't think we have it in us because we're too nice. and too open about our motives and goals.
Maybe also too mmany guys who won't follow orders.
Right. Also that, yeah. So right, you can't get all the cats herded. So we're very good at doing our own thing. So we did our own thing. So it's just a lot of fun. I mean, it's a reaction to something political, and there is sort of a political element to it in the sense that it's BasedCon, meaning like the Philip Dick quote, reality is going to reassert it. We're science fiction and fantasy authors. So we work in a fictional space, but we live in a reality where certain things are true, and we need to have a shared understanding of reality, and to get anywhere, and to be able to just interact with each other. And so that's it's not overtly political. We have very little political content, and anybody is welcome to come. We don't discriminate against anybody. I don't care if you're a socialist or you're, Black or transgender or whatever. It makes no difference to me. You're absolutely welcome, as long as you're respectful to people. Like genuinely, we're genuinely inclusive, not inclusive TM, like in the way the left is, where inclusivity means kick out the people we think are Nazis. We're genuinely inclusive in the sense that anybody is invited. Just be civil, be cool, to other people. We don't have a code of conduct. We don't have any, we just show up and be decent. Be decent to each other.
Yeah, adapting a line from Bill and Ted, right?
Mhm.
Way back in our youth. I wonder if this is another case, as we were saying about with self-publishing, where um, culture and the sort of broad feelings about the legitimacy of institutions just hasn't caught up with the rapidly changing reality on the ground, where there just are institutions have changed fundamentally, but they still have a whole lot of kind of cultural weight and legacy that hasn't all been burnt up yet.
Yeah, it's a very strange time to be involved in life. It's a very strange time. I could just stop at that, but it's a very strange time to be involved in fiction writing and in publishing, and any kind of creative endeavor, because there's I mean, you look at like what's going on with Star Wars, and I stopped paying attention a few years ago, but that's a good example because like when I was a kid, Star Wars came out, the original Star Wars. Again, I'm going to just call it Star Wars because it's Star Wars. 1977, I was a kid, so I don't really remember. I remember Star Wars being this gigantic event and probably like, and I remember some vague things before that, but I was 7 years old, so I don't really have a good feeling for what life was like before Star Wars. But like for a
Mhm.
few years there, life kind of was Star Wars. Like it was all encompassing. Like we had Star Wars action figures, and we had the collectible cards, and we would go. And this was before like people had VCRs and stuff, and even there was no streaming. There was no. You would go to see a movie, and then like maybe you would see it again, and then it would be gone. And so it was like we would talk for years about this thing that we had seen like 2 years earlier, and we were just like all the the games and all the stuff that went along with it, and it felt very, and it was a very kind of unifying. Star Wars like was for everybody, and it was very cool, and it was very unifying, and it was like it was hopeful, and it was good versus evil, and there was nothing complicated about it. And
Mhm.
now you fast forward to today, and it's like, what is Star Wars? It's some kind of weird, multifaceted corporate conglomerate, progressive hype machine thing that's just this weird kind of creepy evil monster that's owned by Disney, which is all bigger, weird, creepy monster that has other tentacles and other things. And they do that. They kowtow to the progressives in this country, but then take the black people off their posters in China
That's
because
true.
they're all things to all people. And it's like, I could not imagine in 1977 or 1980 or 85 or whatever, fast forwarding to the present day, where Star Wars is this weird kind of disturbing kind of thing where it's like, yes, there's some kind of good parts to it, but there's also this weird propaganda element to it, and there's just like people don't really understand what it is anymore. And is it a TV show? Is it movies? Is it 16 different TV shows? Are there more movies coming out? I don't. So it's like everything, and I'm focusing on Star Wars not because necessarily Star Wars is like the end all be all, but because it's kind of a cultural milestone where in the late 70s and early 80s, everybody knew what Star Wars was, and we were all kind of on the same page about it, and we all kind of liked it, or some people didn't, but whatever. It was, most people was like, we're crazy about Star Wars, and it was just kind of a fun thing we did as a culture get together. And now, if you look at it, it's sort of again, sort of a microcosm of like the culture, like what has happened to Star Wars has happened to everything.
Yeah, it is. Like you said, it's a strange and somewhat disturbing time to be alive because you feel like you're living through the crisis of institutions. It feels like
Right.
maybe sort of the 70s redux, but it feels like we're actually going to hit the bottom and bounce.
Right. It feels bigger. I don't really remember most of the 70s, but it feels bigger than that to me. It feels like things are even less certain now. I mean, they're just basic facts about reality that we can't agree on, as a country before. It's like, and as we did before, and it's just, yeah, it's you see an American flag, and it's like half the people are upset because you see an American flag in America in the United States, and it's like that used to be something that just everybody would be rally around the flag. I mean, nobody would be against the flag. And it's just like but everything has to be splintered now. Everything is now a litmus test. It's are you on this team or this team? And it's just I mean, it's good and exciting, I guess, in some ways. There's a lot of great things. I don't want to be totally pessimistic, but it's definitely a strange time to be alive.
Yeah, well, to circle back around towards the end of our time here, towards the theme of the podcast, I would ask sort of what your advice would be for potential students of philosophy. You sort of gave that towards the beginning, but I'm thinking now that maybe one thing to take into account, you and I both being people who sort of came of age in the 90s, that perhaps studying philosophy today is in some ways different, or at many institutions, a different sort of thing from what it was when you and I were studying it back in the early 90s. So perhaps the recommendations we would make would have to take something like that into account.
Yeah, and I have to say that, I mean, like I don't know. I assume that there are still schools that are teaching philosophy that the way they were 20 or 30 years ago, but now everything has become so infected with progressive ideology that I don't even know anymore. Like if I wanted somebody to be able to study philosophy the way I did, 30 years ago, I don't know I don't know if I would even be able to send them to Calvin anymore, because I don't know how badly. I mean, Calvin used to be like extremely conservative school, and I think they still are, and probably the philosophy program is fine, but I don't know anymore, because it's so, you see what happens at places like Yale and Stanford, where it's just like absolute insanity. So I think for the most part, I would be very careful that you're and maybe instead of going to a school to get a degree, because a degree is not going to, I mean, a degree is helpful because you can put it on your resume that I have a degree, but
Yeah.
you might be better off just if you can motivate yourself, which you're going to have to do anyway to do this work. There's all kinds of resources online to learn anything, and you can learn and you can talk to people online who have studied things, and get into discussion groups. And if you want to study Plato or Locke or Marx or whoever, there are people out there who, there are groups, there are books, there are study materials. So I don't even know, and there are things that guides, things that will, curricula or whatever, guides that you can use to study through these things. So I don't know that necessarily a formal institution is even necessarily your best bet, even if you are like you absolutely love philosophy and you want to do that, you may be better off just pursuing it on your own.
Yeah, it seems almost like that whole not knowing who you can trust and not being able to know even about an institution with a reputation,
Right.
unless we might say the specific people who are involved and or have a sort of a testimony from somebody who's been through it, not 30 years ago, but quite recently. That seems almost to be sort of a defining feature of our
Yeah,
present moment.
exactly. Yeah, that's a more concise way of, of saying what I was trying to say. Yeah, very much so, because like even if you wouldn't necessarily know, obviously, as an undergrad going into a philosophy program, what am I going to be studying? But if you went to Calvin College 30, 40 years ago, you knew the tradition, and you knew what that place stood for, and you go, okay, I'm going to be studying this stuff through this certain lens. And everybody has a lens, everybody has a viewpoint,
Mhm.
and this is a viewpoint that it is relatively stable. You know what it is, it's documented, they're open about it. And if you want to depart from that, then you can do that. But now it's like, yeah, you have no idea what to expect of the institution. The traditions are all gone. So I don't know. I don't know where to tell you. There's nowhere, there's nobody to turn to. There's no adult in the room anymore. So it's kind of, I don't know, scary and exciting, I guess.
Yeah, a crazy, disturbing place for us to wrap up today.
Yeah.
I want to say thanks again to Rob. My guest today has been Rob Kroese, sci-fi novelist and organizer of BasedCon this September. His most recent book, as of this recording, I think, is A Scammer Darkly, a Rex Nihilo adventure. which I'm very much looking forward to reading. You've got a couple more Rex books and then some other projects coming out soon, I'm sure.
I have one more Rex book, and then I'm not sure what I'm doing after that. I might actually take some kind of a vacation, but yeah, I hopefully going to write some more Rex books because those are a lot of fun, and they're just entertaining, good fun. They're much lighter than the stuff that I've been getting into with this discussion. So don't let that scare you away. They're just very light, very fast paced, easy read, and they're a lot of fun to write.
We're big fans in my house.
Great.
Thanks again, Rob, for being on the show.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Life After Philosophy. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate it 5 stars and share this episode with a friend. I appreciate your support.